Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Criminally Focused. Whether you're new here or you're a returning OG, thank you so much for clicking on my video. I truly appreciate your support and I'm happy that you found me. I know I might be kind of jumping the gun here with my little costume, but Halloween is literally my favorite time of the year. And I figured with fall officially here and Halloween right around the corner, it would be okay to start celebrating now, right? The fall time is beautiful. It's the best time of year. It's not too hot and it's not too cold. And Starbucks comes out with their pumpkin spice lattes. It's just the perfect time to grab a loved one or a friend with some popcorn and watch a scary movie. To do things a little bit different and not focus so much on true crime, I asked myself, what other things freak me out? Like there's the obvious, paranormal stuff like demons and ghosts. Those things are definitely a bit freaky. But what about being stalked or even having your emails or your bank accounts hacked into? People always joke around that we are being, watched and monitored by like the cameras in our smartphones. But what if a hacker could use that technology to harass you, stalk you, and even threaten to kill your family? That is exactly what happened to a small community in Washington in 2007 when three different homes received threatening calls and even text messages from an unknown caller. The caller threatened to not only kill the families and their animals, but he also seemed to know things like where the kids went to school and what the family was doing and saying inside of their home. The hackers seem to be able to actually control their phones as if they were like holding them in their hands. They are able to turn them on and off and even send messages to people on their contact list. The harassment continued month after month until the FBI got involved, and then one day the harassment just suddenly stopped. Did the FBI scare off the stalker, or were things simply just not as they appeared? Many people believe that the families that were involved in this created this hoax just to get attention, that somehow they were the ones behind these phone calls. However, on the flip side, there are people who do believe what the family has said. And as silly as this may sound, some people have even suggested that maybe their phones were possessed by a spirit. And I'm not sure I would go that, but let's get into the story. And at the end of the video, I would love to hear your thoughts on what you think actually happened. All right, so grab whatever you're drinking or smoking, maybe a friend or two, get comfy, and let's jump right into it.
Hello?
Today's story brings us to the year 2000 and to a small town called Furcrest, Washington, which is located near Tacoma. In 2007, there were just over 6,000 residents living in Furcrest, so it was a pretty small town and it felt pretty safe to the people that were living there. One of the families that were living in Furcrest was the Kuykendall family. And I hope that I'm pronouncing that correctly. Oh, my crazy cat. And I hope that I'm pronouncing that correctly. I really did try my best. But if I didn't, you'll have to let me know in the comments. So Tim and Heather and their daughter Courtney lived together in a home. Their oldest daughter had already moved out at this point and wasn't living there. And like many teenagers, Courtney's age, she had a cell phone. And even though this was like 17 years ago and phones weren't as savvy as they are now, it wasn't that long ago. It was the same year that the iPhone came out. So technology wasn't that ancient. Homes still had security cameras, and the idea of being hacked was known to the public and to law enforcement. However, it was still a new thing, so it was pretty unfamiliar territory. So when people began questioning Courtney about a derogatory text that they received from her, she had no idea what they were talking about. The text had said one word, and that was gay. And this was out of the ordinary for Courtney to just send a text like that. So it was pretty weird to everyone. Courtney swore she didn't send the messages and that she didn't know who did. And at this point, she didn't really think too much into it. Maybe it was just some weird glitch, like in the cell phone, and somehow, like, phone lines got crossed and the message was sent by mistake. However, things started to escalate pretty quickly when Courtney started receiving text messages and phone calls that were pretty threatening from a blocked phone number. This person would call and text at all hours of the day and night. And pretty soon, he wasn't just bothering Courtney, he was also calling and messaging her parents' phones as well. And if you're anything like me, I don't answer blocked or restricted phone calls, and neither did the Kuykendalls. When they didn't answer these calls, they would be left threatening voicemails. As these calls continued and the harassment continued, the family started referring to the caller as restricted because that's what popped up on, their caller ID when he would call. Restricted told them, not to go to the police, that there would be hell to pay if they did. However, they did anyways. When they spoke with police, they showed them the text messages that they had been receiving as well as let them listen to the threatening voicemails that Restricted had left them. After the meeting, the police told them that they would look into it, kind of trace the calls and try to figure out who Restricted was. After the family returned home from talking to the police, they received yet another voicemail from Restricted. When they listened to the voicemail, they were expecting to hear like his raspy, creepy voice. Instead, they heard their own voices. Somehow, Restricted had recorded the entire conversation that they had had with police officers. And allegedly, their phones were off during this time. Like the police told the family, they did look into where these calls were coming from and trace them. And when they did, they found something pretty interesting. Apparently, most of the text messages and phone calls were linked back to Courtney's cell phone. Courtney denied any involvement, saying she definitely wouldn't make those phone calls or send the messages. She would never have any reason to threaten her family. This confrontation between the police and Courtney didn't stop the harassment. In fact, it actually picked up a notch. The Kuykendalls soon became aware that Restricted was not only listening to them, but also able to watch them through their phones. Because now when he would call, he seemed to know like exactly what they were doing while they were alone in a room in the house. Tim, the father, reportedly said that like he would get a phone call from Restricted, and when he would answer it, he would hear his other families who were in other parts of the house. Tim also said that the family began receiving pictures of themselves like doing random stuff throughout the house, like obviously not taking the photo themselves. So how did these photos get taken? So at this point in the story, at least for me anyways, things were looking a little fishy. As soon as I heard that those phone calls, the majority of them traced back to Courtney's phone, that made me incredibly suspicious of her. I mean, can you blame me? And why was this hacker only harassing the Kuykendalls? Because at this point, they were the only family in the neighborhood to report any type of harassment. However, soon, Andrew McKay, who was their neighbor, also started to receive threatening, freaky ass phone calls. One day, she was in her kitchen and she was cutting up some limes, and she received a text message saying, "I prefer lemons." Which I know it might sound a bit comical as we sit here and talk about it, because it's not really a threat. However, if I was cutting limes up in my kitchen and somebody called me or sent me a message saying they preferred lemons, I would definitely be freaking out because this would mean that someone I didn't know was watching me. It is important to note here that besides from being the Kuykendall's neighbors, Andrea McKay and her daughter were also connected to them. See, Andrea was allegedly the mother of one of Courtney's friends. So I'm not sure how important that is, but it's just another connection to Courtney that I found weird. Darcy Price, who was the Kuykendall's oldest daughter and was married and living out of the house at the point, Restricted started calling the family, she started to receive some phone calls and some creepy voicemails as well. One in particular that has been shared with the media is Restricted calling and threatening her children's school. And I'm going to play it here in a sec, and it's really short. But just a heads up, it is talking about coming in to shoot up a school, which as a parent is always terrifying to hear. Incredibly frustrated with how this investigation was going, the Kuykendalls decided to take things into their own hands. So they went out and bought new cell phones, thinking that this would potentially stop the hacker in his tracks. Unfortunately, it didn't. So next they tried switching phone carriers, which also didn't work. And anytime that they would switch a cell phone carrier, switch their phone number, Restricted would find their number and he would call and tell them to stop doing what they were doing. Stop changing your phone number. Stop switching carriers. So, since the investigators said that the calls were being traced to Courtney's phone, the family's next step was to take away her phone, turn it off, and hide it. And then they would just have to wait and see if the calls would stop. Well, they didn't, even with Courtney's phone off and allegedly hidden away. Restricted was still calling and harassing them. And since they couldn't figure out how to get Restricted to stop calling and watching them, out of precaution, the family got a security system, in an attempt to help them feel somewhat safer. However, Restricted would soon leave them a voicemail reciting exactly what that security password was. What the In the meantime, the local law enforcement continued their investigation. However, they were completely stumped. So the FBI got involved. And pretty much right after the FBI got involved, the phone calls suddenly stopped and allegedly never happened again. So, because of this and the fact that the majority of the calls and messages were traced to Courtney's cell phone, the investigators came to the conclusion that either she was involved and making these phone calls herself, or someone close to the family was. Restricted knew way too much personal information for that not to be the case. And many people believe this theory. However, some still wonder if something more sinister could have been at play. Could the family's phones legitimately been hacked and being controlled, by someone else? So at the time, according to Matt Sullivan, who was the spokesperson, I guess, for Sprint, he said that they were unaware of any technology that would allow the activity of what the family was reporting, meaning they didn't believe that someone at the time would have been able to hack into somebody's phone and control it like the Kuykendalls said their phones were controlled. However, according to some technology experts, they believe that although difficult, it was absolutely possible that someone could have hacked into the family's phones. Take James Atkins, for example. James is an electrical surveillance expert, and he said at the time it was possible for cell phones to be operated remotely. And because they could be remotely accessed, a hacker could easily have had the access to pinpoint someone's location, take photos, and record conversations. He also went on to explain that cops at the time really wouldn't have been able to truly comprehend the technology and all of the abilities hackers could have potentially had. And side note, when we're talking about Mr. Atkins, know that he's just not some random expert. He was actually trained by the National Security Agency and was asked to testify in front of Congress when there was apparent leak of classified information. So he's definitely trained and very knowledgeable about what he's talking about. He went on to explain that phones can be cloned, and this would give a hacker basically the power to do everything that the owner of the phone could do. And I guess by phoning a clone, phoning a clone, by cloning a phone, so by cloning a phone, the hacker would now have the ability to do everything that the owner of the phone could do. You know, he would be able to, like I said, pinpoint a location, take photos. However, to listen in on a conversation and be able to record it, that seemed to be something that was highly sophisticated. He explained that in order to do this, the hacker actually would have had to hack into the cell phone company's website. And then from there, he would have had to somehow manipulate their software as well as the firmware on the phone to hack into it. From there, the hacker may have had the ability to do what the family said Restricted was doing. So could it have been somebody from the phone company itself? I also read other articles where they talked about websites that were around during the time that allowed a user to call someone from any phone number that they wanted. And you know what? I vaguely remember these. You know, you could put any number into the to little area and any number into the received from. And then the website, I think, would just call them. But I don't know. I have questions. If these phone calls were showing up as restricted, were the text messages showing up as restricted too? I just never heard of getting a blocked text message. But maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm just being clueless. Maybe it just showed up as like a couple numbers, like spam text. I have no idea. This story, it honestly just gave me goosebumps, and it kind of made me feel like putting a piece of tape over my phone's camera. Just kidding. But I wouldn't do that. Now that I got myself at least freaked out about my technology being hacked, is there anything that we can do to prevent something like this from happening to us? You know, for the most part, hackers aren't going to be calling us and threatening us and watching our every move. However, they can still cause some pretty major damage. According to experts, changing your password regularly and getting security software like installed on your devices is crucial in protecting yourself. You know, and if your phone does get hacked, take it to the police and get a new phone and inform your cell phone provider. I guess after hearing this story, I would say, you know, don't treat being hacked as just something annoying that happens and can be ignored because you just never know. It could turn into something much, much worse, potentially even life threatening. All right, guys, like I said, you'll have to let me know in the comments section what you think about the story. And also, if you're not subscribed, please consider hitting that subscribe button. It's a free way to help your girl out, and I truly appreciate it. All right, guys, until next time, stay safe, stay spooky, and stay focused. Bye.